let's get to the review of our HR glossary term for today's episode. Today, we are focusing on a single term, and I am going to review it a couple times for you, actually twice. This is a term that I feel like, again, is foundational under employment law. And it's one that people often don't necessarily get right. So the term is reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation is a changes to a position or workplace that will enable an employee to do his or her job despite having a disability. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations. They have to provide these reasonable accommodations to qualified employees with disabilities, unless doing so would pose an undue hardship. There are several terms in here that you need to remember. I'm going to read this again for you. Reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation is assistance or changes to a position or workplace that will enable an employee to do his or her job despite having a disability. This falls under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. Employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations to their employees. These are qualified employees with disabilities. Unless doing so, providing that reasonable accommodation, it would be an unreasonable accommodation in this case, because it would pose an undue hardship. If you are looking for more resources on the topic of accommodations, and specifically reasonable accommodations, and are conducting an accommodation audit to determine if this is a qualified accommodation, I would suggest that you check out this resource. It's www.askjan.org, askjan.org. They offer a list of accommodations by disability and a worksheet that is incredibly helpful. That's askjan.org. This is really driven by the Department of Labor. Understanding the reasonable accommodation process will help you not only pass the exam, but also in your job as HR leaders. Again, this is one of the areas I see a lot of HR leaders and managers struggle with, is accommodations. And that's because we don't get accommodation requests every day. It's not like we have lots of job requisitions, so maybe we do a lot of recruiting. We do with payroll every 2 weeks. But accommodation requests sometimes are unfamiliar, and this is where we make missteps, and that can get us in a lot of legal trouble. So most accommodations cost organizations under $500. So if you're looking for additional review, askjan.org is the place to go. I will link to this in the show notes of this particular episode. So this is a great place to get access to more review to help really let that information settle in. I want this to go into your long-term memory banks so recall is easy come exam day.